Com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer
California is going to pull the plug on its billion-dollar bullet train.
on AM 560.
The latest estimate for completion was set for 2033, and yet that would still have been completed before the Byrne interchange.
The Answer.
You're so funny.
I am. I'm a riot. I'm
Oh,
a
my
scream. Also funny this weekend, President Trump at CPAC. I mean, volume comic, admit, not everyone was a home run, but over 2 hours, you're going to stick some landings, and he did. Now, he also was serious, and you could tell when he was serious, he went sotto voce. He went like quiet voice.
Well, he went down an octave.
Yeah. Focus. And it was on serious topics like, say, for example, trade, although there was a certain circus-like quality to even that discussion.
Let's just hear it. It's pretty funny.
Trump talking about reciprocal tariffs and who are these people that oppose reciprocal tariffs.
But you have to start working on some of the senators that say, I can't approve this deal. I say, you know what, I want to just charge India, as an example, I'm using it, but India is a very high tariff nation. I mean, nobody knows it because nobody knows what they're doing in Washington. But India is a very, very high tariff nation, and they charge tremendous numbers. So they charge 100, so I say, I'm not going to charge 100, but I'm going to charge 25%. And I hear there's turmoil in the Senate because we're charging 25. So I call a couple of the guys up. I say, fellas, listen, they're charging us 100 for the exact same product. I want to charge them 25, and I feel so foolish charging 25. Because it should be 100. But I'm doing 25 only because of you. I want to get your support. Sir, that's not free trade. Where do these people come from? Where do they come from? Where? Where do they come from? I need your help. Yeah. I need your help, the voters' help.
Where do they come from? I don't know. They come from the group
these people?
Yeah, they're from people who read Wealth of Nations or David Ricardo's work. They're from economics departments at places like George Mason University. I suppose that's where some of these people come from. But that's Trump on trade. We know that. We've discussed that at some length over the last couple of years. And this news out this morning on that topic. Reuters, citing a source briefed on negotiations, reporting that the U.S. is poised to lift sanctions on at least $200 billion worth of Chinese goods under a proposed trade deal with China. China would lift retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., make pledges for economic reform. The source telling Reuters that China had reserved a 10-day window around March 20th for a possible summit with the U.S. to announce a trade deal. So that's perhaps explains why Trump has postponed some of the dates that were supposed to trigger additional tariffs on China because they were making progress. We'll find out more about that as information becomes available. But on the topic generally, as we take a look at how the U.S. economy performed with nearly 3% GDP growth last year. We're pleased to be joined again by Jim Iuorio, who is an entrepreneur in the Chicagoland areas. He owns Brandt's in Palatine and also a CNBC contributor. Jim, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What did you think about what Trump had to say about reciprocal tariffs and these weird people that oppose such policies?
I understand that when there's an added derivative and it's difficult to get your head around using tariffs to achieve free trade, but that's what he's been trying to do the whole time. And if you doubt that, I mean, you're just wrong. I guess it's fair to make an argument against everything, and that's cool. But you're just wrong. He's made this clear the whole time that he wants free and open trade. And if he has to impose reciprocal tariffs, he'll do that. And they just go back to their economics books from Harvard and go, well, tariffs aren't free trade, so we must be against free trade. And it's completely tiresome at this point in time. We all know what he's trying to achieve. Whether or not he'll get it or not is still a little bit up in the air, but it looks like he's making good progress on it. Yes, he is a free trade guy. Larry Kudlow, who I have had a close relationship, and yes, I'm a name dropper, is a free trade guy.
Yeah. Rick Santelli, who we've talked on the show, yes, we're name droppers too, has given
and Stephen Moore.
And they're both free marketeers, and they're giving the president the same sort of latitude on this topic. But I wonder if there are still concerns that that this area of policy, of economic policy, could disrupt the progress that's being made on tax and regulatory policy?
I actually thought it was a mistake when he went down this path. And the reason I did is because, China, they don't have to run for re-election. They can withstand a lot more pain than we can. And I thought it might blow up in his face. I'm so glad that it looks like I'm wrong on this. And all the different macroeconomic things, this was the only thing that I, in my head, disagreed with. And if it comes out okay, which it looks like it's gonna, I think this is a huge thing. I think you just said, 3% GDP for last year, which we were told was impossible by the previous administration. And keep this in perspective. Like someone will say, well, during Obama's administration, they achieved 3% at a couple different times. Achieving 3% when interest rates are zero is a lot different than achieving 3% when interest rates are, 3% as well.
Right. Yeah, right. And speaking of the dollar, Trump made mention of one other macroeconomic, had one other macroeconomic discussion with his adversary in absentia. That would be Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed. And he talked about, the essential disagreements that he's had with Powell about raising interest rates, saying that he wanted a strong dollar, but not too strong a dollar. Did he massage that issue properly from your perspective?
It's so unusual to have a president who comes out and speaks about interest rates and speaks about the price of the dollar. We've never really had that before. I believe it's always happened. It happened behind closed doors. We had a discussion on Twitter over the weekend because I tweeted something about how Obama never lobbied for lower interest rates. Well, yeah, that's because Obama had, for 7 out of 8 years, essentially zero interest rates throughout the curve. So every president who has high rates doesn't want them. I think presidents forget that low rates, inorganically held low rates, inflate bubbles. And we saw it in the tech bubble and we saw it in the real estate bubble. I don't want that to happen, so I think he's wrong for lobbying for lower rates. I think he'd be smarter to just try to come up with a macroeconomic policy that allows for rates to go higher and doesn't punish the savers and doesn't push people out the risk curve as far as it has happened in the past.
Speaking of money, AOC's new Green Deal would cost, $93 trillion, I think. And do you think this plan is just a simple gift to Republicans?
I do think that's the case. I think that they're way overplaying their hand. People love to hear, jobs for everybody, but I don't think there's enough people in the country that are that stupid that can swallow that sort of thing. And you guys know, I'm sure you've talked about it there before, too, this new MMT, which Stephanie Kelton, the Stony Brook professor, and Bernie Sanders, chief economic advisor, is touting, where you basically, the premise of it is that you can borrow and spend, print and spend as much as you want, and anytime you begin to see inflation, that you just raise taxes really quick. Now, anybody who knows, even took 2 days of Econ 101, understands two things. One is that spotting inflation is really hard to do. We've already proven that it can be done. It couldn't be done in real estate. And it couldn't be done in tech stocks. Secondly, no politician just can immediately raise taxes when they're 4 months away from an election. The whole notion of it is stupid. The whole Green Deal is stupid. The guy who founded Greenpeace yesterday had some really nasty words for AOC. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it's just a dumb idea.
Speaking of dumb ideas, so let's bring that locally. Chicago mayor's race, April 2nd, the runoff between Preckwinkle and Lightfoot. And you've had proposals from the corporate titans in Chicago to raise the state income tax, to raise the state corporate tax, to tax retirement income. You've had proposals from the labor unions and progressive socialist activist base of the Democrat Party propose a city income tax, plus a LaSalle Street tax on the exchanges, and all sorts of other things. Which tax increase package do you like, since those are the parameters of debate here? We have C-suiters that talk about raising these taxes and labor unions that talk about raising and creating these new taxes. I'm not sure what the difference is between the two groups here anymore.
Well, okay, first of all, if I'm going to have to pick one, I completely hate them all. And I think first of all, there's this notion that either the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois, the county of Cook, that somehow they need more tax revenue. First of all, that is completely absurd. They have plenty of money. If the state of Illinois was given a $100 billion gift from someone, they'd spend that, promise the pensioners another $100 billion under the guise that they're planning on getting a lot more of these gifts. It's not additional revenue does nothing. Now, that being said, Adding a little bit of tax to the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago is actually doing quite well and are still a commerce engine that's running the whole state. Taxing certain things a little more, but you guys know what happened in Detroit when they put that 1.5% living in the city of Detroit tax back in, I believe it was the 70s, and all of a sudden everybody, they called it white flight, but it was really green flight. That's what it works. Money goes to where it's treated best. But do I think the city of Chicago could withstand a tiny bit more taxes? Perhaps. Do I think it's needed? I think it's completely outlandish to suggest that any of these governing bodies need a penny more.
And so, despite the tax levels at the current level, you've seen a massive outmigration from Chicago, the only major city in the country, losing populations. Houston passes us in population last year. So how well is Chicago really doing, or are we not looking at a city that's got some gilded neighborhoods along the Mag Mile and a handful of wards, but is otherwise crumbling underneath the surface?
They're like I said, they're doing okay. They're doing okay because there's a much greater economic boom going on. The second that turns around, Illinois, the city of Chicago is in a very poor position to continue paying their debts, continue to have the rating on their bonds that they currently do. I think it's just what we're seeing here is ridiculous. They should be lowering taxes and trying to build a base and figuring something out. And by the way, the math on the pension thing just long-term doesn't work. There'll come a day where people will stop lending us money when they think we're not. And the bankruptcy or reworking the pensions is something that will happen. So I don't know, everyone said, a state can't declare bankruptcy. Well, sure they can. Arkansas reworked its debt back in 1933. That just the federal government has to bless that action, which has happened before. So we're in a bad spot, and when the next major recession comes, in Warren Buffett's word, we'll see who's wearing pants when the tide goes out.
So you think that's the only solution, right, is declaring bankruptcy?
I think that's either the only solution or to rework the pensions and allow that. And we challenged it once in court. It was my belief, and that got turned down. So, I wonder if there's a way that you could really get a real live task force to convince the unions and convince the pensioners themselves that that's the only way to do it. I'm sure that would not happen because there's plenty of people who don't understand the economics of it who are willing to try to convince them the other way, and then we're just where we started.
He is Jim Iuorio. He's a CNBC contributor, and he's the proprietor of Brandt's in Palatine, which has the best burger in the Western world, as I am told. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Have us out there, Jim.
Yeah, you guys are invited. You can do a show from out there. It'd be really fun, I think. And when it's the summer, outside on the deck, I think you guys would love it.
All right. Done. We'll work it out. We'll work out the details. We'll have our people talk to your people.
Amen.
Thanks, Jim.
Patio sounds lovely, especially when it's -20 right now. And Jim joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer.